guys, Richard Holder here, and welcome to the channel. Where are my 4.8 liter LS guys? What do all the 4.8 liter LS guys have in common? What's the one thing that they all want more of? Low speed torque. I'm going to show you how to get it. In this video, I'm going to show you how to improve the torque production of the little 4.8 liter LS. Some of the things work a little bit, and some of the things work a lot. So now that we've decided we all want more torque from our obviously small 4.8 liter LS application, let's take a look and see what happened when we tried to do just that using various methods. And we'll show you which ones were successful and which ones were not. First of all, obviously we would try camshafts. So camshafts are one of the big upgrades to any LS. And it's usually the first thing that guys do after they do the minor things like cold air intakes or exhaust and things. But if you really want to get power from an LS, cam and springs are kind of the go-to thing because I already have fairly good cylinder heads and intake manifolds, and except for the 4.8, usually they have fairly good displacement as well. So this is what we did. We got a 4.8 from the Junkyard, brought it over and ran it at West Tech Performance. We ran it in stock trim, although this one did have long tube headers. It had a stock throttle body, stock truck intake manifold, stock 706 heads, the stock bottom end. Basically, this thing was all stock. This wasn't even the motor they normally show where we had upgraded pistons or anything. This was just an all stock one from the wrecking yard, and we used it for a number of different tests. So we ran this thing with a Holley HP management system and obviously dialed in the air, fuel, and timing. So rather than a completely stock one, it did have an optimized air, fuel, and timing, an optimized tune for it. And we ran it the way that we run all of these with no accessories and nothing on the throttle body and stuff. So that's why these make more power than they're rated at by the factory, because we run them differently. So run in this manner, our stock 4.8 liter, this was an LR4, so a flat top piston, 706 headed, small camshaft. In fact, this camshaft is the mildest of all of the factory cam offerings. So this is basically the smallest cam that GM offers. And it's one that's shared by the 5.3 and also the early 6 liter. So run in stock trim, our 4.8 liter LR4 produced 333 horsepower and making peak power at 5,500 and made peak torque of 343 foot-pounds at 4,700 RPM. Now let's take a look at what we did, our first steps to try to improve the power. Now in this series we ran a number of different camshafts, a bunch of mild, what you might call truck cams. These were all from crane cams. They were all what they were calling direct fit cams back then. So here's what happened when we installed our first camshaft. You can see, as normal, what we would expect from a camshaft. We did pick up peak power and a fair bit of peak power given the mild camshaft. Peak power was up to 361 horsepower and peak torque was up to 362 foot-pounds. So now let's take a look at the specs on our camshaft. This cam was 500 lift 502. It had 200 degrees of duration, so it was a single pattern cam both on the lift and on the duration. So it had 200 degrees intake and 200 degrees exhaust, and it had a 113 degree lobe separation angle. But you'll see here where most guys with a 4.8 want more low speed power, the camshaft didn't add a ton. I mean, most of the gains from any kind of camshaft on an LS are going to come out at the top of the rev range, and this is more so on a 4.8 because it has less displacement than a 5.3 or a 6.0 or a 6.2. So the gains that you get are going to be more centered toward the top end. We did get a little bit more torque down low. So here below 3,000 RPM. At 3,000 RPM, the torque went from 313 to 328. And we may have seen a little bit down here in the 2,000 to 2,500 range. About 7 or 8 foot-pounds. Some of that might be the difference between maybe small changes in temperature when we're running the motor. So there's probably not a lot of torque down in the 2,000 to 2,500 range, which is where most guys would really want it if you're using your poor little 4.8 to do towing or something. But let's take a look. We ran another camshaft on this, a slightly bigger camshaft, and we did indeed pick up more peak power. Peak power was up to 372. Peak torque was up just slightly to 365 foot-pounds. Although again, we at 3,100, we picked up a little bit of torque from the other cam. We picked up another 5 foot-pounds, but not a ton, not the numbers that guys want when we're looking at cam upgrades on a small displacement motor like this 4.8 liter. So if you're looking for torque, it looks like from these mild camshafts that you're not going to get a ton of extra torque from a cam change. Now, the one thing I would like to see on these cams when we didn't test it, but these all had what I would call fairly wide lobe separation angles. I'd like to see these kinds of cams with a much tighter LSA, which might help low speed power. So if instead of 113, 14, or 15, if we had 111, 110, or 109 degree LSAs on these cams, which we could do and not have to worry about piston to valve clearance, we probably could enhance low speed power a little bit more. But the reality is you're just not going to get a ton of power, at least down low, from a cam swap. But let's find out how we do get more low speed torque. Okay, as we've seen, if you've got a 4.8 liter and you're looking to make more torque, you know, maybe a camshaft isn't the ideal choice. You're definitely going to pick up more power at the top of the RPM range, but you're not going to get big chunks of torque down low, the kind of thing that we want when we're looking at a 4.8 and we're driving a 4.8, especially if we happen to have one in a truck and we're trying to tow things with it, which is a little bit more difficult. You can obviously always bring the RPM range up where it starts to kind of make power, but let's face it, we all want, you know, the 2,000 to 4,000 or 4,500 kind of torque range where it's going to be most beneficial. So if the camshaft doesn't work, what is something that does work? And this is a fairly easy upgrade. One of the best ways to improve torque production for any motor, obviously, is to make it bigger. I mean, it's such an easy thing on the 4.8. So if you're going to the wrecking yard and you're thinking, okay, I'm going to get a 4.8 and I'm going to use that, you'd be much better off if you're looking for low speed power to just pick a 5.3. I know it's an easy, obvious thing, but if you take a look, a stock 5.3 that we ran in the same manner as the 4.8 already starts off with, at 2,500 RPM, it starts off with 50 more foot-pounds of torque. There's no camshaft that you can put in a 4.8 that's going to give you 50 foot-pounds of torque at 2,500 RPM. The only possible solution to that or answer to that might be variable cam timing if you apply that on your 4.8 liter. So you might be able to get, I don't know that you'd get 50. You'd have to have a combination of things to get 50 foot-pounds of torque from variable cam timing if you applied that to your 4.8 liter. That would be an interesting test to try to apply variable cam timing to the 4.8 and see what we could do on the low speed power area. Are you listening, Brian Tooley? Maybe we need to try that on a 4.8. But if you're going to the wrecking yard, you're going to get a motor. It's just a lot easier to start with something that's bigger to begin with. If you start with a 5.3, not only do you get 50 foot-pounds more at 2,500 and likely at 2,000 RPM as well, but you get that kind of 50, 60, even 70 foot-pounds of torque through most of the RPM range. And if you're looking at, on a truck, you're looking at this thing shifts at 5,500 RPM, you're not revving it way out there where you're going to kind of take advantage of a cam upgrade anyway. Even a fairly mild cam, as we saw, most of the gains were out fairly high on the 4.8. And then if we take this the next step further, you know, going from a 4.8 to a 5.3 is good, and if that is good, going to a 6.0 is even better. Now, we didn't run the 6.0 all the way down at 2,000 RPM, but you can see that it's bigger, it's going to make a lot more torque. That's why they use the 6.0 in the heavier trucks, because you're going to be towing with it, and, you know, the truck itself is heavier. So if you can find one, and I never do at the wrecking yard, all I find are 4.8s and 5.3s, but if you can find a 6.0 and start off with that, then obviously you're going to have a lot more low-speed torque to play with, and more torque is always better. Let's take a look at one final way to improve the torque of a 4.8 without changing the motor. Okay, I know what you're thinking. Okay, well, if I can't do a camshaft upgrade and get low speed power, and if I already have a 4.8 and I can't go get a 5.3 or a 6.0, then what should I do? Well, the answer, as always, is to add boost. So here's what happens when you add boost from a single turbo. You can also do it with a positive displacement supercharger if you're looking to add more low speed power. A centrifugal supercharger is not going to add a lot of low speed power simply because it has a rising boost curve. So down at 2,000 RPM, you may only have a couple pounds of boost, whereas on a positive displacement blower, you're probably going to have, you know, depending on how you pull it, but 7 or 8 or 10 pounds down low. So down low will be much better than a centrifugal. But here's what happens when we added a single turbo to an otherwise stock 4.8. Now, we didn't run it all the way down to 2,000 RPM, but you can size the turbo so that if you're most concerned with power in the 2,000 to 5,000 range or so, or 5,500 RPM range, you can size the turbo so that you get very, very good boost response and lots of low speed power. In this case, we can take a look at our example. Got a single turbo. This one was our DNA GT45 turbo. You could even pick a slightly smaller turbo than that for a 4.8, even a GT3582, something like that if you want to be very responsive. We had on this one the DNA tubular headers. You could use the stock exhaust manifolds equally well. We had two wastegates on this, the Turbo Smart stuff. And then we had a single, we had our air-to-water intercooler from ProCharger. But as you can see, even just with a stock cam and stock heads and stock intake manifold, if you just add boost to this, in this case even low boost, this was between 7 and 8 pounds, you're going to pick up huge amounts of torque. And you can't get that any way else other than if we went way up in displacement from the 4.8 as we show to the 5.3 and the 6.0, and you could go to a 383, or if you had a 408 or a 408 version of a 6-liter, obviously those increased displacements will get you more low speed power as well. But forced induction is a really good way to go. And the nice thing about this kind of combination is you still have the stock camshaft, so the thing idles like stock. You have a stock intake, stock heads, you don't have to do any of the changes. And you just have a lot more, not only a lot more low speed torque, but a lot more torque everywhere. In this case, this thing made 523 horsepower and 529 foot-pounds of torque. And it's still over 450 foot-pounds at 3,000 RPM. And if you had boost there, if you size the turbo correctly, and I don't know that I would recommend the GT45 for this application, maybe something a little smaller, but if you had low speed torque down there and you wanted it at 2,000 RPM or 2,500 RPM, the other thing to remember is if you're trying to run this with a stock converter and all of a sudden you're adding 150 more foot-pounds of torque, basically adding 50% torque down at 2,000 RPM or so, you're going to raise the stall speed of the stock converter, because the stock converter isn't an absolute number. It's based on the power output or the torque output. And if you increase the torque output dramatically, you're going to increase the stall speed as well. So all of that's going to work out fairly well. Boost is always the answer when you're looking for more torque. Let's get to our conclusion. Okay guys, what do we learn from this example as we go looking for more torque production from our little 4.8 liter LS motor? Well, obviously a camshaft is really not going to get us there. I mean, it is going to add some, it's going to add a little bit down low, it's going to add even more at the top. But if we're looking for low speed torque, a camshaft really is not going to get us where we want to be. Now, if you're going to the wrecking yard and you're going to pick a motor, obviously, as I said, don't pick the 4.8 if you're looking for low speed torque. Get the 5.3, or if you can find one, get a 6.0. More torque, more displacement, all of that stuff goes together. Obviously, the other answer, as we showed, is boost. Now, you can run a positive displacement blower like a Whipple or Kenny Bell or even a Magnuson. All of those will give you good low-speed boost response and add lots of torque. As we showed here, also the turbo, if you size it correctly on a 4.8 liter, we ran the GT45. You can run something smaller like a GT3582, like the max speeding stuff that we've been using, and also an S366, something sized smaller. If you're running a 4.8, you're not looking to make 1,000 horsepower. There's no sense in putting 1,000 horsepower turbo on it. Put something that's going to be a 600-700 horsepower turbo. It's going to be very responsive and give you all the boost that you need down low to get all the torque you need. Armature holder, make sure to like, share, subscribe, ring the bell, do all that stuff. More testing coming up.